this wonderful crowd. Thank you to Rainy Day Books, to Vivian and Roger. Such a great asset to our community here with all these programs. I'm glad to see my kids in the audience who asked me to mention their names: Henry, Ella, Addie, Clara. My wife Karen is here, my mother Dorothy. Many friends, but also new faces as well. Thank you all for coming out. I appreciate your time and interest. In Rise to Greatness, I tell the story of the most eventful and perilous year in American history, 1862. As much as possible, I tell it through the eyes of the man who guided the nation through the fire, Abraham Lincoln. I don't want to spoil the book for you, so let me just say that the year began with the American Republic in grave danger. The Union armies were struggling to grow virtually overnight from a few thousand men scattered across the continent to more than 500,000. The inexperienced officers thrust into command of these raw volunteers were stymied by the sheer size of the breakaway Confederate States of America, which covered a space larger than the entire European territory conquered by Napoleon. Lincoln's closest advisor was Secretary of State William Henry Seward. Seward said that even smart people failed to see the difficulty of the Union's task. They didn't apprehend the vast extent of the rebellion, as he put it. Military operations, to be successful, must be on a scale hitherto practically unknown in the art of war. And yet the War Department was a corrupt shambles, its chief on the verge of being fired. The Confederacy also wielded a powerful economic weapon, near total control of the global cotton supply. This was a time when textiles were driving the Industrial Revolution, and cotton was perhaps the world's most important single commodity. The South refused to sell cotton unless the British and French governments recognized its independence, which put tremendous pressure on Europe to intervene in favor of the Confederates. European statesmen at the beginning of 1862 considered the Union's cause to be hopeless. Quote, "It is in the highest degree likely that the North will not be able to subdue the South," British Prime Minister Lord Palmerston told his Foreign Office. Meanwhile, the Lincoln government appeared overwhelmed. Congress and the White House were in the hands of a political party that had never governed before. The Treasury Department was broke, and yet federal spending was multiplying as never before. In 1862, the U.S. government would spend 6 times as much money as it spent in 1861. And where would it come from? Northern banks, fearing an economic panic, had closed their exchange windows in late December, refusing to redeem paper money. Meanwhile, rebel soldiers menaced Washington from nearby Manassas, Virginia, where they had routed a Union army a few months earlier. Confederate artillery sealed the Potomac River above and below the Capitol, and no one in civilian authority, not even Lincoln, had any detailed knowledge of the plans being prepared by the Union's top general, George B. McClellan. He worked in secrecy, assisted by a small clique of generals who shared his views of Lincoln's policies. They were opposed. Worse, McClellan was rumored to be dying. Would his plans die with him? Under these circumstances, for the first, and as far as we know, the only time in the war, Lincoln entertained thoughts that the North might fail. The people are impatient. Treasury Secretary Chase has no money and tells me he can raise no more. The general of the army has typhoid fever. The bottom is out of the tub, Lincoln declared during the first week of January. From the days of the Romans all the way up to the recent history of revolutionary France, no republic had ever survived such a calamity as the Civil War. And so, to people who knew their history, in the fevered climate of Washington, D.C. at that time, there was endless talk of the need for a military dictator to replace the seemingly weak elected civilian who lived in the White House. McClellan himself toyed with the idea. Quote, "I almost think if I were to win some small success now, I could become dictator," he wrote to his wife. And he gloried in his newspaper nickname, the Young Napoleon. He even posed for official photographs with his hand tucked into his tunic. At a cabinet meeting on New Year's Eve, the Joint Congressional Committee on the Conduct of the War spent more than 90 minutes asking hard questions about this situation, and Lincoln's answers left everyone shocked and unnerved. Afterward, Attorney General Edward Bates sat up into the night, filling page after page of his diary. Quote, "The Secretary of War and the President are kept in ignorance of the actual condition of the Army and its intended movements," Bates confided. The blame, he concluded, lay with Abraham Lincoln. "An excellent man," wrote Bates, "and in the main wise, but he lacks will and purpose, and I greatly fear he has not the power to command." Over the next 12 months, the Civil War became a cataclysm. The federal government became a colossus, and the Confederacy came close to winning its independence, yet suffered the key losses that led to its doom. 1862 sounded the death knell of slavery and forged the military leaders who would eventually win the war, men like Grant and Sherman, Sheridan and Farragut. The future of the nation was sketched that year in indelible ink, a blueprint for an America of continental breadth, networked transportation, widespread education, and industrial might. And at the same time, these 12 terrible months revealed the dreadful cost of entry into that future, payable in blood and misery on battlefields from Shiloh to Sharpsburg, Pea Ridge to Fredericksburg. Most of all, though, 1862 was the year Lincoln rose to greatness. Never since the founding of the country had so much depended on the judgment and the cunning, the timing, and the sheer physical endurance of one man. Now, how Lincoln survived and ultimately triumphed through 1862 is a very good story, but it takes a whole book to tell. Tonight, I'd like to talk for a few minutes with you about why Lincoln poured everything he had into this struggle. Why was it so important to him to save the Union? Why fight a war that cost more American lives than all our other wars put together? 750,000 people dead and countless more wounded in body and in mind. To understand this story, I must take you back another 50-plus years before 1862 to a winter day in February 1809. When Abe Lincoln was born in the Kentucky wilderness on Sunday, February 12th, he entered a world as harsh and primitive as if he had been born 1,000 years earlier. There was no doctor. Simply giving birth put his mother's life in mortal danger. The only help available was the old granny woman, as they